Have you ever felt like the underdog in your own family? Like no matter how hard you try, you're always stuck in the shadow of someone else. Well, that's exactly how Emily felt growing up. The youngest of two sisters, she was always the quiet one, the creative one, while her older sister, Jessica, was groomed for leadership. But Emily, she was overlooked, underestimated, and totally ignored when it came to the family business. Little did they know, Emily was about to prove that she was the one with the real power all along. Growing up in a family like Emily's meant there were unspoken rules. Her dad ran a successful commercial real estate development firm, but his focus, his energy, was always on the business side of life. It wasn't like he didn't care about his daughters, it's just that he saw business as the ultimate path to success. And Emily, well, Emily was the youngest, the one who was always left out of the big conversations, always overlooked, while her sister Jessica was the one in the spotlight, constantly being groomed for greatness. It started when Emily was just 7 years old. She remembered sitting quietly outside her dad's office, waiting for him to finish a meeting with investors. Her older sister, Jessica, was always the one to walk right in, asking questions about the business, getting involved, even at a young age. Her dad loved it. He'd smile, answer her questions, and explain market strategies in a way that made her feel like she was already part of the team. Emily, on the other hand, didn't even bother to ask questions. Her dad always had the same response: "Not now, Emily. This is complicated." It wasn't that Emily didn't want to be part of it. She had questions too, but when she asked, it felt like her dad was dismissing her, as though the world of business wasn't for her. She was just too young to understand. He would say, or maybe it just wasn't her world. And that's the thing, he didn't just tell her she was too young. The way he said it made her feel like she was simply irrelevant, like she didn't belong in the room. And it wasn't just him, everyone else in the family, too. They all seemed to be so focused on Jessica's future that Emily felt invisible. As the years went by, the divide between Emily and Jessica grew wider. Jessica was already on the path to leadership. At 12, she was attending business camps, getting involved in networking events, and landing finance internships. Emily, she was busy with her piano lessons and art classes. Sure, they were important in their own right, but they didn't carry the same weight as Jessica's business ventures. At least, that's how it felt. It became clear that Jessica was the achiever, the one who was going to take over the family business one day, while Emily was considered the creative one, the one who was supposed to support the family but never really be part of the business itself. It wasn't like Emily didn't try to break into those conversations. But over time, she stopped trying. Around the age of 16, she realized something that would shape the rest of her life. She wasn't meant to be part of the business discussions. She wasn't expected to contribute anything of value. So, instead, she just listened. She absorbed everything: market trends, profit margins, expansion plans, everything that was being discussed at the family dinners. But she never said a word. It was as if she had become a passive observer in her own family's life. The conversations were all about Jessica, how well she was doing in business school, what deal she was negotiating next, how much money she was making on her internships. And Emily, she stayed silent. It didn't matter how much she knew, how much she learned. She was never invited into the conversation. Her dad ran a commercial real estate firm that wasn't huge but was successful. They brought in about $30 million in annual revenue and had a team of 23 employees. Not a massive operation, but enough to make a solid name in the Midwest. Jessica joined the company right after college, and it was clear she was being groomed to take over. Everyone assumed she would be the one to inherit the company, to continue the legacy. But Emily had chosen a different path. She went to school for finance, something that, in her family's eyes, didn't seem all that important. Finance. Sure, it sounded serious, but it didn't have the same glamour as running a business. Still, Emily had dreams. She wanted to succeed in her own way, even if it meant doing it far from her family's gaze. But then graduation day came, and the divide between Emily and the rest of her family was never clearer. Her family didn't even attend her graduation. It wasn't intentional. They just didn't see it as a big deal. Jessica's promotion party, the one where she had just made VP of operations at 26, was that same weekend, and that was priority number one. Emily understood, though her mom's words stuck with her. This is Jessica's big moment, her graduation. Well, it was just, not that important. After graduation, Emily found herself in New York, working as an analyst at Goldman Sachs. She started at the bottom, of course, but she was good, really good. Numbers came naturally to her. She could spot patterns in market data that others missed, see undervalued opportunities, and predict shifts before they happened. But as usual, nobody in her family really cared. They didn't ask about her work. Not really. When she visited for holidays, the conversations would always circle back to Jessica's latest deal, her new project, the company's expansion plans. If anyone did ask about Emily's job, it was always the same. Still doing the finance thing, her dad would ask, barely looking up from his conversation with Jessica. And Emily, she'd just nod. Still doing the finance thing. The funny part was, Emily didn't mention how well she was doing. By 29, she had made partner at Goldman Sachs, generating $847 million in returns over just 3 years. Her specialty, strategic investments in mid-sized family businesses, just like her dad's company, and she had been keeping an eye on their family business for a while. She had big plans, but no one knew about them. No one even noticed. Jessica was still the star of the family, still the one everyone admired and expected to take over the family business. Emily just kept quietly stacking her achievements in the background, never sharing them with anyone, because it seemed like nobody cared to ask. After graduation, Emily's life took her far from the family's expectations. She landed a job at Goldman Sachs, a prestigious firm in New York City, starting out as a low-level analyst. But Emily wasn't just any analyst. She had a natural gift with numbers. She could analyze market trends in a way that most of her colleagues could only dream of. It wasn't long before she started spotting opportunities others missed, undervalued assets, market shifts before they even became visible. She was the kind of person who could predict where the market would go, but no one at Goldman Sachs, or more importantly, her family, knew just how skilled she had become back home in Indianapolis. The family's attention was still firmly fixed on Jessica. She was always the one getting the praise, the accolades, and all the attention. Whenever Emily came home for the holidays or family gatherings, conversations inevitably circled back to Jessica's latest career milestone. Oh, Jessica's negotiating this big deal. Or she's been working on an expansion project. Or did you hear about her new promotion? The focus was always on her. Emily would listen, nod along, and maybe offer a comment here and there. But mostly, she stayed in the background, as usual. No one asked her about her work, at least not in any meaningful way. They had asked the same tired question, "How's the finance thing going, Emily?" It wasn't exactly a question that showed interest or curiosity, more like a polite, perfunctory check-in. But here's the thing Emily was doing incredibly well. She wasn't just doing the finance thing, she was excelling at it. By the time she was 29, she had made partner at Goldman Sachs, a huge accomplishment for someone her age, especially considering the competitive nature of the firm. Over a span of just 3 years, her portfolio management had generated nearly $850 million in returns. She had become a rising star in her field, specializing in strategic investments in mid-sized family businesses just like the one her dad ran. But no one in her family really knew this. They didn't understand what she was doing or how big of an impact she was making in their eyes. Emily was still the artsy, creative one who lived in New York but probably wasn't making much money. After all, she still drove that old Honda when she visited. She still wore clothes from Target, clothes that seemed perfectly fine to her, but definitely didn't scream business success in the way Jessica's designer outfits did. It didn't help that Emily's family still saw her as the other, the one who wasn't as important in the family dynamic. When they would talk about Emily's career, it was as if it was a side note, something that wasn't worth diving into. Meanwhile, Jessica continued to rise through the ranks of the family business. Jessica was the one who got the internships, the training, the connections, while Emily was stuck doing something unspectacular in the world of finance. Her family had their view of her, and no amount of success in New York seemed to change that. At Goldman Sachs, Emily wasn't just another analyst. She was the kind of person who understood the markets in ways that most others couldn't. It was more than just crunching numbers. She could predict the next big move, the next market shift. With an almost uncanny accuracy, she had a sixth sense for undervalued opportunities and emerging trends, and she knew how to make them work in her favor. But all of this, her remarkable talent, her quiet success, was invisible to her family. They saw her job as just another finance thing, something not really worth talking about. In fact, when she would visit for holidays, it was always Jessica who got the attention. Jessica was always the one who talked about her latest business moves, her new promotion, the new deal she had closed. Emily's role was simply to nod and smile, acknowledging that she was still doing the finance thing. It was almost as if her accomplishments didn't matter, or at least they didn't matter as much as Jessica's. They never took the time to ask Emily how she was actually doing. They never saw her as the successful professional she was. They only saw her as the quiet younger sister who didn't quite fit into their world of big business. But Emily had built a successful career in her own right. She had a unique ability to see patterns in the market that others couldn't. It wasn't just about making money, it was about understanding the bigger picture. She specialized in strategic investments for mid-sized businesses, exactly the kind of companies her dad's firm worked with. She was watching the family business closely, studying their financial moves, understanding the dynamics of their operations. She could see what her family couldn't see. She understood the mistakes they were making, the risks they were taking, and the vulnerabilities in their business. But again, she kept quiet. She didn't offer advice. She didn't bring it up. Her family never asked. What they didn't realize was that Emily was the one who had the power to fix their problems. She had the money, the expertise, and the experience to turn their company around. But they never saw her as that person. They just assumed that because she wasn't involved in their business, she couldn't possibly be successful. They didn't see the quiet power she had built for herself in the world of finance. Emily wasn't the loud, in-your-face type of success that they were used to seeing. She didn't flaunt her achievements like Jessica did. But her success was undeniable. In a way, Emily had built her own empire, one that nobody really knew about. She had quietly accumulated wealth, knowledge, and experience that could have helped her family in ways they would never understand. But Emily wasn't looking for validation from them. She had carved out her own path, and she was content with that. She didn't need the recognition or the praise. What she did need, though, was for her family to finally see her for who she really was, the successful businesswoman they had ignored for years. It wasn't long before the family business hit a rough patch. Despite the years of steady growth, a major development deal in Cincinnati fell through, and the fallout was more severe than anyone expected. The company lost $8 million in the process, and just like that, things were tight, their credit lines were stretched thin, and cash flow was running dangerously low. It was a turning point for Thompson Development. They needed capital and they needed it fast, or they would lose everything. Emily had been watching from a distance, always keeping an eye on the company. She'd been keeping track of the numbers, and it didn't take a financial genius to see the writing on the wall. But even though she could see the crisis coming, her family still didn't realize that Emily could help. They didn't know she had the power to step in. In their eyes, she was still just the artsy one, living in New York, doing something with finance. They hadn't really taken the time to understand her work or how much she had accomplished. Then, one evening, Emily got the call. It was Jessica, and Emily could tell right away that something was wrong. It had been 2 years since they'd spoken. The distance between them had grown over the years, but the desperation in Jessica's voice was unmistakable. "Emily, Dad's in trouble," Jessica said, her voice tight. "We need some help. We need to borrow some money, maybe $20,000, just temporarily." Emily was quiet for a moment. $20,000. It sounded like such a small amount, especially to someone like Emily Mentz, who had become accustomed to handling far larger sums. But the tone of Jessica's voice, the urgency behind her words, made it clear that this wasn't just about money. It was about something much bigger, the family business, and possibly their future. Emily thought for a second. She could have just lent them the money, helped out in the way they expected her to, but that didn't sit right with her. She knew that this wasn't just about saving a company for a few months. This was about something bigger, something that could potentially change the entire dynamic of the family business. "I don't have that kind of cash available," Emily lied, but she didn't leave Jessica completely empty-handed. "But I know some investors who might be interested in helping you out." Jessica's relief was palpable. "Really? Oh my God, that would be amazing. Can you connect us?" Emily agreed to make the connection, but she wasn't going to make it obvious. She didn't want her family to see this as another simple act of charity. This time, she was going to use her knowledge of finance and her ability to make strategic investments to turn the tables. She wasn't going to give them a handout. No, this time, she was going to take control quietly, from behind the scenes. The deal was structured through MT Capital Holdings, her personal investment vehicle. MT Capital was a name that meant nothing to her family. It wasn't her name, at least not directly. She had used her middle and last name initials to keep her identity hidden. She wasn't going to step in and be the savior. She was going to let her investment do the talking. Emily connected them with investors who were interested in providing the capital needed to keep the company afloat. $50 million, far more than the $20,000 Jessica had initially asked for. But in exchange for that capital, Emily didn't just offer a loan. She took control. The deal was structured so that Emily's firm, MT Capital, would acquire a 60% equity stake in the company. She would control the board. Her family would keep operational control of the day-to-day business, but all major decisions would require board approval, Emily's approval. Jessica and her dad were thrilled when they heard the news. They had saved the company. The family business was back on track, but they didn't know the full truth. They didn't know that the person who had really saved them was the same person they had ignored for so many years. Emily's decision to step in wasn't just about saving the business. It was about taking control of something that had always been out of her reach. It was her chance to finally have a say in a world that had always excluded her. When Emily attended the family's Christmas gathering that year, the atmosphere was electric. The family celebrated the successful rescue of the company. Jessica took full credit for the turnaround, as expected. She talked about how she'd brought in the capital, restructured operations, and repositioned the company for growth. And while everyone praised her, Emily sat quietly at the kids' table, her presence barely acknowledged. For 3 years, Emily watched from the sidelines as the company stabilized and grew. Revenue hit $45 million annually. They expanded into new markets. And Jessica, naturally, took all of the credit for the turnaround. She was hailed as the business genius who saved the family company. Meanwhile, Emily stayed silent, still the creative one in their eyes. It was as if her contribution never mattered. Even though she had restructured everything behind the scenes, she had given them the capital, she had taken control of the board, but they still didn't see her for who she really was. Emily wasn't bothered by the silence. In fact, she didn't want the recognition, but that didn't mean she wasn't paying attention. She was watching, listening, learning every aspect of the business. She was quietly pulling the strings, but she was content to let Jessica be the face of the success, knowing full well that she was the one who had saved them all. And as the years passed, Emily's grip on the company tightened without anyone even realizing it. It was Thanksgiving, and the family had gathered, as they always did, at her parents' house in Indianapolis. The air was thick with the usual warmth of family tradition laughter, the smell of roasted turkey, and the clinking of silverware as the plates were passed around. There were 37 people in total, including aunts, uncles, cousins, and, of course, Jessica's fiancé, Marcus, who had already begun to weave himself into the fabric of their family as though he had been there for years. Emily arrived as usual, in her old Honda, pie in hand, store-bought, nothing fancy, just like the rest of her. She wore a simple navy dress from Target, one of those things that might have caught attention if it were more fashionable. But in Emily's case, it was just part of her understated look. Jessica, on the other hand, arrived in her brand new Mercedes, as always looking the part of a successful businesswoman, her hair perfectly styled, her clothes designer. She walked in carrying artisanal wine, the kind that came with a price tag no one mentioned, but everyone noticed. The dinner table was where the dynamics of the family always played out. Her father, as usual, sat at the head of the table, exuding authority. Mom was to his right, Jessica beside her, and Marcus next to Jessica. Emily, she was seated between two teenage cousins who barely looked up from their phones during the meal. And, as always, the conversation turned to business. It was almost as if Emily weren't there at all, like her presence didn't matter beyond being a silent observer. "We're looking at a major expansion into Columbus," her dad announced, his voice brimming with pride. "A $40 million development, a shopping complex, and residential towers. It's going to transform our portfolio." Jessica chimed in, her voice confident and assured. "I've been negotiating with the city for 6 months now. This is the deal that's going to take us to the next level." Dad beamed at her. "Such a brilliant businesswoman," he said, raising his glass in a toast to Jessica, future CEO of Thompson Development. Emily smiled thinly, swirling her wine around in her glass, not speaking, just listening. She cut her turkey into tiny, precise pieces, pretending to enjoy the meal. Everything was as it always had been. Jessica's achievements were celebrated, and Emily was just there, a background player, never the focus. Uncle John raised his glass too, a jovial smile on his face. "To Jessica," he said, "to future success." The toasts went on, the compliments flowing like the wine, and Jessica basked in it all. "The financing is almost locked in," she continued, clearly enjoying the spotlight. "We're closing a $40 million credit line next week. The bank loves our growth trajectory." Marcus squeezed her hand, a proud smile on his face. "My brilliant fiancé," he said, leaning in to kiss her on the cheek. "She's gonna run a $100 million company by 35. Emily watched the exchange with a quiet sense of detachment. No one asked her about her work. No one noticed her quiet success. The conversation kept flowing, and Emily remained the silent one, the person who didn't quite belong in their business world. But this time, something in Emily shifted. She couldn't just sit there and let them continue with their assumptions. It wasn't about the money anymore. It wasn't about the business or who controlled the company. It was about finally being seen for who she really was. Aunt Marie, who sat across from Emily, glanced at her over the table. "You're awfully quiet tonight," Emily, she said, her tone a little too forced. How's your little job going? Emily blinked, taken aback by the question. It's going well, thank you. Uncle John, who had never really understood what Emily did, piped in. Still doing the analyst thing? He asked it like he had asked her the same question for years. Still doing the finance thing? Something like that, Emily replied, keeping her voice even. Jessica laughed, a sound that wasn't as pleasant as it was meant to be. Emily doesn't like talking about work, she said, her voice dripping with that familiar, condescending tone. It's fine. Not everyone needs to be in business. The world needs artists and creative types, too. Emily's smile tightened. She looked at her sister, her calm demeanor hiding the storm that was beginning to swell inside her. I'm in finance, she corrected mildly. Right, Jessica replied, waving a dismissive hand. Finance. She looked at Marcus, clearly eager to continue the conversation. Emily works for some firm doing, what is it exactly? Paperwork, investment management. Marcus, ever the corporate type, gave a slight nod. That sounds complicated, he said, the words almost patronizing. I'm sure it's important. He turned back to Jessica, whose face glowed with pride. Jessica handles our investments, she said. Made us $200,000 last quarter alone through her company stock options. Emily remained calm, but the sting of Jessica's words hit harder than it should have. Impressive, she said, her voice steady, though the words felt like they came from someone else. The conversation moved on, back to business strategies and market opportunities, as Emily stayed quiet. But it wasn't the small talk that bothered her. It was the fact that no one truly knew who she was anymore. She had sat through years of these dinners, listening to her family celebrate Jessica's successes, listening to them dismiss her own. Jessica talked about financing structures, market positioning, and the Columbus deal's specifics. Emily knew that Jessica was getting several of the technical details wrong, but no one corrected her. Why would they? She was the golden child. Everything Jessica said was automatically brilliant. After dinner, the adults retreated to Dad's study, the important people room where the real business happened. Emily had never been invited in before, but this time, she followed, wine glass in hand. She quietly entered the room, taking a seat in the corner. Dad glanced up, surprised. Oh, Emily, he said. We're going to talk business. It might be boring for you. I don't mind, Emily replied, her voice calm. She looked at Jessica, whose expression shifted slightly, like a silent communication passed between her and Uncle John. Just ignore her. She'll get bored and leave, Jessica said, her tone casual but dismissive. Emily wasn't going anywhere. She stayed seated, wine glass in hand, as the conversation began. The Columbus deal, projections for $60 million in revenue, the need for additional capital. Jessica continued to talk confidently, outlining how they planned to secure more funding. Then Uncle John mentioned something that made Emily's heart race. We should consider buying out the investors eventually, he said, his voice laced with greed. Take back full control. Perfect, Jessica said, looking at Marcus adoringly. We don't need the outside money anymore. Emily's heart pounded in her chest. The family was so quick to dismiss the very investors who had saved them from bankruptcy 3 years ago, but it was that moment that broke her silence. She set down her wine glass, her voice steady but firm. What about me? She asked, cutting through the conversation like a knife. The room fell silent. Everyone stared at her. Confusion etched on their faces. You said family business should stay in the family, she continued. I'm family. Jessica blinked, clearly taken aback. What about you? She asked, her tone sharp. You know exactly what I mean, Emily replied. meeting Jessica's gaze with a calm that made her sister uneasy. "You said family business should stay in the family. I'm family." The awkwardness in the room was palpable. Emily's family hadn't expected this. They hadn't expected her to speak up, to confront them about the truth of the situation. But Emily wasn't done. She wasn't just going to be the quiet observer anymore. She was about to change everything. The tension in the room after Emily's confrontation was palpable. But she remained calm, as if this was just another business meeting, nothing more than a transaction to be handled. She had been quietly preparing for this moment for years. Now that she had finally been forced into the spotlight, she wasn't about to make any emotional decisions. This was business, and Emily knew how to handle business. In the days following the Thanksgiving dinner, Emily set her plan into motion. She had spent years watching, analyzing, and quietly controlling the family business through her investments. Now, she needed to make sure her position was legally recognized and solidified. She wasn't just going to remain the quiet investor. She wasn't going to allow Jessica and the rest of the family to continue running things as they had. It was time to restructure, but not just in the way anyone expected. Emily knew that in order to truly have the power, she needed to ensure the board's loyalty and, most importantly, her complete control over the company. She had already provided them with the much-needed $50 million capital infusion, but that wasn't enough. The real power came with the terms. The controlling interest in Thompson Development, the 60% equity stake she held through MT Capital, was a means to an end. Emily wasn't just going to be a silent partner, she would now dictate the company's future. She started by having her team draft new terms for the company's leadership structure. It wasn't just about money anymore. Emily knew she had to change the way the company was run. She couldn't afford to let Jessica continue to lead without oversight, especially given how unqualified she had proven herself to be in some aspects of the business. There would be no more blind trust in Jessica's leadership, no more letting her call all the shots. Emily began planning the financial restructuring and operational control changes that would make sure she had the final say. The new terms were aggressive, but Emily knew this was necessary. The terms would force the family to acknowledge her influence and place her at the heart of every major decision. Jessica's salary, for instance, would be slashed dramatically, from $340,000 to $120,000. That wasn't just a pay cut, it was a message. A message that Emily wasn't here to play nice. She wasn't going to let Jessica continue to take advantage of her position as the golden child who could do no wrong. Uncle John's salary would also be cut. He would see his $280,000 pay slashed to $95,000. The operational control that Jessica had grown used to would now require Emily's approval, and any decision above $50,000 would have to go through her first. Emily wasn't done yet. As part of the terms, she insisted that Marcus, Jessica's fiancé, be completely excluded from the business. He would no longer be allowed to have any say in the company's decisions. Emily knew that Marcus, with his self-important attitude and legal background, had always acted as a sort of buffer between Jessica and the rest of the family. He had played a role in their business discussions, often making strategic decisions without understanding the full picture. But now, he was out. The changes weren't just financial, they were personal. Emily knew that for her to truly have control, the family needed to see her as the true leader. That meant restructuring not just the business, but their perception of her. The family had always thought of her as the outsider, the one who didn't belong in the business world. Well, she would make them understand just how wrong they had been. The most important change was one Emily had been preparing for a long time. She wanted to publicly acknowledge her role as the primary investor. No more hiding behind MT Capital. No more pretending she wasn't the driving force behind the company's success. All major decisions, all contracts, all hires would need her signature from now on. Everyone would know that she was the one who had saved them from collapse, and now she would lead them to even greater heights. The restructuring wasn't just about taking power, it was about ensuring her position was undeniable. Emily knew that Jessica and the family might resist at first. They might try to fight her changes, argue about the cuts, or protest her new oversight. But Emily had anticipated all of that. She had already taken control of the narrative. She knew they would have to accept her terms. The company had no choice. They needed her money, and they needed her influence. Without her, the company would fall apart. She had them right where she wanted them. Emily's cold, calculated approach was working. The negotiations were tense, but she didn't flinch. She had the leverage, and she used it. Every phone call, every meeting was handled with the precision of a seasoned executive. She knew exactly what she wanted, and she wasn't going to back down. She was no longer the quiet younger sister at the kids' table. She was the one who controlled the company's future, the one who held the purse strings and made the critical decisions. Her family might not have recognized it before, but they had no choice now. They had to recognize her power. The day the terms were finalized, Emily received the signed documents. They had agreed to everything, without modification. Her restructuring plan was in place, and she was now the dominant force in Thompson Development. The family had no idea what was coming next. They thought they had won, but Emily knew better. This was just the beginning. She was going to take the company to the next level, and she wasn't going to let anyone stand in her way. The family business had been saved, but now it was hers to shape as she saw fit. The shift in Emily's role within the family was unmistakable, and it happened fast. The holiday season came and went, but it was clear things had changed. The family, especially Jessica, couldn't ignore Emily anymore. She had stepped into a role no one had expected, and now they had no choice but to acknowledge her for what she truly was, the primary force behind the success of Thompson Development. At future family gatherings, the dynamics were different. Emily no longer sat at the kids' table. She sat at the head of the table, where the important decisions were made. No longer was she the quiet observer, the invisible one. Now, when the conversation turned to business, everyone looked to her first. They asked her opinion, they sought her input, and most importantly, they treated her as the equal she had always been. Though they hadn't realized it before, Jessica, who once held the spotlight, found herself relegated to the background. No longer was she the hero of the family's business story. The narrative had shifted. Emily had taken over not just the business, but the story. She didn't need to flaunt her success like Jessica did. Her control over the company, her strategic decisions, and her quiet ability to turn things around spoke for themselves. Dad. Once the undisputed patriarch began to see his role evolve as well, he was no longer the one running the show. He had a more advisory role now, with Emily at the helm. But Emily didn't force him out. She worked with him, leveraging his experience and knowledge, while still making it clear that she held the final say. It was a delicate balance, but one that was necessary for the family's survival. Jessica, despite her initial resistance, had to accept that Emily was the true mastermind behind the company's revival. The tension between the sisters was palpable, but Emily was no longer interested in vindicating herself. She didn't need her family's approval or recognition. The company's success was her success, and that was all that mattered. She wasn't there to play the role of the younger, overlooked sister anymore. She had earned her place. As for the future, Emily was steadfast. She would continue to run the business on her terms, and there was no room for sentimentality. This wasn't about family loyalty or keeping the peace. It was about maintaining control and ensuring the company's future. She wasn't going to let anything jeopardize what she had worked so hard to build. Emily had finally taken the reins, and she wasn't about to let go. And so, Emily's journey came full circle. From the overlooked youngest daughter to the one who held the reins of the family business, She proved that sometimes the most powerful moves happen in silence. The family dynamic had shifted, but Emily remained focused on the future, and one thing's for sure, she wasn't done yet. Who knows what's next for her? Now that she's fully in control, maybe we'll find out one day. If you enjoyed this story and want to hear more, don't forget to like and subscribe. Who knows? There might be more twists ahead. Thanks for watching.